The flight school recruits thought she was a joke. "What can some washed-up SERE instructor teach us?" they whispered. They mocked her scars, questioned her methods, rolled their eyes at her paranoid survival protocols. She was too intense, too damaged, too angry for their tastes. Until the avalanche buried their mountain camp and someone finally read the faded tattoo on her shoulder. SERE School, graduate number 001, Phoenix, Staff Sergeant Kristin, Phoenix. Nakamura's mornings always began the same way. Suffer dort otes alarm. Fully awake within 5 minutes, 10 minutes of meditation, then a 6-mile run, regardless of weather, season, or physical condition. At 42, Nakamura had been working at Fort Bragg's Military Survival Training Center for 8 years, and to her students, she was an enigma wrapped in military discipline and barely contained intensity. Her arms and hands bore countless small scars, some in straight lines, others irregular, like claw marks. On her right shoulder was a small tattoo that very few people could decipher. The students called her the Ghost, not because she was hard to find, but because she looked like she'd seen death and barely escaped. Those 1,000-yard stares, the way she moved like every shadow might hide an enemy, the edge in her voice when she barked commands that brooked no argument. But the truth was far more complex than any of them imagined. Phoenix had earned her reputation the hard way. 3 tours in classified locations, operations that officially never happened, missions that existed only in redacted files, buried so deep that most Pentagon officials had never heard of them. She was the military's first SERE graduate, the program's founding mother, and quite possibly the most qualified survival instructor on the planet. Not that any of her students knew that. To them, she was just another damaged veteran taking out her trauma on the next generation. "Today we're running a hypothermia simulation," Nakamura announced to the 12 elite pilot candidates standing before her. These were the Air Force's brightest stars. Harvard, MIT, Stanford graduates, high IQs, higher confidence levels, and absolutely zero tolerance for what they perceived as outdated military paranoia. "Ma'am, if I may ask," interrupted Second Lieutenant Marcus Webb, 25 years old, Texas A&M graduate, 3rd-generation military. "How relevant is this exercise to actual combat conditions? I mean, we have modern survival gear and satellite communication systems." "Gear fails," Nakamura cut him off sharply. "Radio dies, GPS goes dark. Your rescue team can't reach you for 72 hours. Now what, Webb?" The young pilot smiled with the confidence of someone who'd never truly been tested. "Ma'am, respectfully, those kinds of extreme scenarios aren't very realistic anymore. Modern technology and protocol redundancies mean technology fails, Webb. It always fails. And when it does, all you have left is yourself and what you've learned." Snickers rippled through the group. Nakamura's eyes hardened. "Something amusing, Lieutenant Morrison?" 24-year-old Sarah Morrison was the most vocal of the group, a MIT graduate with degrees in aerospace engineering and computer science. "Ma'am, it's just, I mean, maybe in your generation that was true, but we have much more advanced systems now. This paranoid approach seems a bit outdated." Nakamura studied her for a long moment, then walked slowly to the back of the classroom. "Outdated," she said quietly. "Interesting choice of words. Ma'am, we're not trying to be disrespectful," added Lieutenant David Taylor, 26, Stanford graduate, son of a Silicon Valley tech executive. "It's just that some of us have studied modern survival techniques, and a lot of what you're teaching seems excessive, like preparing for scenarios that just don't happen anymore." "Excessive," Nakamura repeated. "Scenarios that don't happen." She turned back to face them. "Tell me, Taylor, what's the longest you've ever gone without food?" "Ma'am?" "Simple question. What's the longest period you've gone without eating?" Taylor looked uncomfortable. Maybe 12 hours during a long flight." 12 hours? Nakamura nodded. "Morrison, what about you? Ever spent a night outdoors without shelter?" "Well, I've been camping. With a tent, sleeping bag, probably a cooler full of food and bottled water." Nakamura's voice was getting quieter, which somehow made it more menacing. "What about you, Webb? Ever been truly cold? The kind of cold where your fingers stop working and your thoughts get fuzzy?" Webb shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I don't see how—" You don't see how, Nakamura finished. None of you see how, because you've never been there. You've never felt what it's like when everything you depend on disappears and all you have left is what's in your head and what you can do with your hands. 3 days later, the group was at the training camp in the Colorado Rockies. 8,000 feet elevation, mid-December, temperature holding steady at 15 below, wind gusting to 40 miles per hour. "We'll be simulating real conditions," Nakamura announced as the group gathered around her. 72 hours with minimal equipment, no radio communication, no GPS, no modern conveniences. "Ma'am," Webb said, pulling his jacket tighter against the wind, "this seems a bit extreme. The weather forecast shows a major storm system moving in." "Storms don't wait for your convenience, Webb. The enemy doesn't check the weather forecast before launching an attack." The students exchanged glances. This woman was definitely paranoid. Nakamura issued each student a minimal survival kit, water purification tablets, basic first aid supplies, one emergency blanket, and a fire starter kit. "That's it?" Morrison asked. "Usually we get more comprehensive equipment." "This is it," Nakamura replied. "In real survival situations, you don't get the luxury of choice." That night, after they'd set up their tents, the students watched Nakamura from a distance. She hadn't pitched a tent at all. She was simply sitting among the trees on the snow-covered ground with her emergency blanket draped over her shoulders. She looked like she was meditating. "Crazy," Webb whispered to Morrison. "Completely nuts." "I heard she cracked up during her last deployment," Morrison whispered back. "PTSD or something. That's why they stuck her here teaching instead of active duty." "Makes sense," added Taylor. "Look at all those scars. And the way she acts like we're about to be attacked by enemy forces. Classic trauma response." What they didn't know was that Nakamura could hear every word. Sound carried differently at altitude, especially in the thin, cold air. She'd positioned herself precisely where the wind patterns would bring their conversations to her. She'd heard it all before. The whispers, the assumptions, the casual dismissal of her methods as the ramblings of a damaged mind. It never bothered her anymore, because she knew that understanding would come. It always did, usually when it was almost too late. The second morning, at exactly 0642 hours, the mountain shook. First came the sound, a distant rumble like thunder, but deeper, more primal. Then the ground began to vibrate. Then, from far away but growing rapidly closer, a roaring sound that seemed to swallow all other noise. Nakamura was on her feet instantly. "Avalanche! Everybody move, now!" But it was too late. The white wall was coming toward them at 200 meters per second. "Get behind the rocks! Emergency positions!" Some students froze in panic. Others started running in the wrong direction. Chaos reigned completely. Nakamura grabbed Webb by the arm and yanked him behind a large boulder. She shoved Morrison toward a protected alcove. In seconds, she had positioned all 12 students in the safest available locations. The avalanche roared over their camp. 3 minutes of white hell, then silence. Nakamura was the first to stand. She surveyed the area quickly, automatically cataloging losses and assets. The tents were gone. Most of their equipment was buried, and worst of all, their communication equipment was completely destroyed. "Sound off!" she barked. "Everyone alive?" One by one, voices responded. Everyone was breathing, but 3 had minor injuries. "Ma'am," Webb said, his voice shaking. "The radio, GPS, everything's gone." Nakamura looked at him with calm eyes. "Welcome to real survival, Webb." The first 6 hours were critical. The students were in shock. Some were having panic attacks. The temperature continued to drop. "We need to build shelter," Nakamura said. "Search and rescue won't reach us for at least 72 hours, if at all. We need to survive until then." "Ma'am," Morrison said, "how will they even find us?" "All communication is lost. There are emergency protocols, but until then, we need to stay alive." Nakamura began organizing systematically. First, medical triage, then shelter construction, then water procurement. "Webb, Morrison, you're with me. We need to find a water source. Taylor, Martinez, gather shelter materials. Johnson, Rodriguez, stay with the injured and provide basic medical care." "Ma'am," Webb asked, "how are we going to find water? We don't have GPS or maps." Nakamura stopped. She studied him for a long moment. "Webb, look at these mountains. Read the topography. Which way does water flow? What do the wind patterns tell you? What do the animal tracks indicate? Webb looked around helplessly. He saw nothing but rocks and snow. Nakamura sighed deeply. Follow me and observe exactly what I do. For the next 6 hours, the students received an education that no classroom could provide. Nakamura found water half a mile away, using nothing but landscape observation. She built a shelter using only hand tools and natural materials. She started and maintained a fire without any modern equipment. Most impressive was her medical triage. Rodriguez had dislocated his shoulder, and Nakamura relocated it using makeshift tools with the precision of a trained physician. "Ma'am," Morrison asked, "how do you know all this?" "SERE training," Nakamura replied, stoking the fire. "Survival, evasion, resistance, escape." "But ma'am, this level of expertise, this is way beyond normal SERE training." Nakamura looked up from the fire. "I'm not a normal SERE instructor, Morrison." That night in the shelter, when the temperature dropped to 20 below, some students began showing signs of hypothermia. Nakamura treated each one systematically, without panic. She taught them how to maintain body heat, how to preserve circulation, how to keep mental clarity in extreme conditions. "Ma'am," Taylor asked, "have you been in real situations like this before?" Nakamura was quiet for a long time. "Yes," she said finally. "Several times." "In combat?" Another pause. "In places that officially don't exist." On the second night, when Webb began showing severe hypothermia symptoms, Nakamura resorted to the last option available. She removed her shirt to share body heat. Morrison saw Nakamura's back and gasped. Her back was covered with dozens of small scars. But the most striking thing was the tattoo on her shoulder. At first glance, it looked like an eagle. But when Morrison looked closer, she froze in shock. "SERE School, graduate number 001, Phoenix." And below that, in much smaller letters, "Classified Operations Division." Morrison's eyes widened. "Graduate number 001. That meant, "Ma'am," she whispered, you're the first graduate of the SERE program." Nakamura looked at her for a long moment, then quietly put her shirt back on. "This conversation stays classified, Morrison." "But ma'am, Classified Operations Division? It means I received very specific training. Training that normal military personnel don't get." Morrison's mind began racing. The techniques Nakamura had taught them, the scars on her arms, that 1,000-yard stare. "Ma'am, you were in actual combat, weren't you?" Nakamura stared into the fire. "I've been places that officially don't exist. I've participated in operations that don't appear in any records, and I've trained people whose names are classified for national security." Webb, gradually warming up against Nakamura's body heat, was only semi-conscious. But Morrison's questions grew more urgent. "Phoenix," she whispered. "Your call sign is Phoenix because ... because I was the only one who came back from the dead," Nakamura said calmly. Multiple times. The weight of that statement settled over Morrison like a cold blanket. She looked at the scars again, this time understanding what each one might represent. "How many times?" Morrison asked quietly. "Enough to know that survival isn't about being the strongest or the smartest," Nakamura replied. "It's about being the most prepared, and preparation means accepting that everything you think you know might be wrong." Morrison was silent for several minutes, absorbing this information. "Ma'am, when we called you paranoid, you were being normal," Nakamura said. "Most people can't imagine scenarios where all their safety nets disappear. They don't want to imagine them. It's psychologically easier to believe that modern technology has eliminated the need for primitive skills. But you know better. I know that technology fails. I know that help doesn't always come. I know that the difference between living and dying often comes down to what you learned before you needed it." Webb stirred slightly, his body temperature stabilizing. "Ma'am," Morrison continued, "the Classified Operations Division. What kind of missions?" Nakamura was quiet for so long that Morrison thought she wouldn't answer. "The kind where you go in knowing you might not come out," she finally said. "The kind where extraction isn't guaranteed. The kind where everything depends on your ability to survive, evade, resist, and escape, using nothing but what's in your head and what you can improvise from your environment." "How long?" Longest was 47 days behind enemy lines. Captured twice, tortured, escaped, made it home. Used everything I learned to develop the program that trained you. Morrison felt tears freezing on her cheeks. This woman they'd called crazy, paranoid, damaged, had survived things they couldn't imagine and then dedicated her life to teaching others how to do the same. Ma'am, we owe you an apology. You owe me nothing, Nakamura said. But you owe yourselves the commitment to take this training seriously. Because someday, your life might depend on it. On the afternoon of the third day, helicopter sounds began echoing through the mountains. The students jumped to their feet excitedly. But Nakamura remained calm. "Ma'am, we're being rescued," Taylor shouted. "Yes," Nakamura said, "but you were already rescued 72 hours ago." Webb looked at her. "Ma'am? You survived, in extreme conditions with minimal resources working as a team. That's the greatest rescue of all." When the helicopter landed at the extraction site, Colonel Patricia Hayes stepped out. She was the SERE program director from Fort Bragg. "Phoenix," Hayes said, approaching Nakamura. "Sit rep?" 12 personnel, all accounted for, minor injuries only, mission parameters exceeded, Nakamura reported with military precision. Hayes looked at the students. They all looked different somehow. There was something new in their eyes, a respect that hadn't been there before. How did the students perform? Initial resistance to protocols, standard skepticism regarding non-technological solutions, but they adapted quickly under pressure. They show potential for advanced training. Hayes smiled. Typical Phoenix assessment, understated. Webb stepped forward. "Ma'am, may I ask about Instructor Nakamura's background?" Hayes and Nakamura exchanged a look. "Classified," Hayes said. "But I can tell you this, Phoenix is the founding architect of the SERE program. First graduate, most successful instructor, and a legend." Morrison spoke up. "Ma'am, we had no idea. We thought she was just what, Lieutenant? We thought she was paranoid, damaged. We called her crazy." Hayes nodded slowly. "Phoenix has heard worse, haven't you, Phoenix?" Nakamura shrugged. "Comes with the territory. Let me tell you something about crazy," Hayes continued, addressing all the students. "Phoenix was declared dead 3 times in the field. Each time she survived using nothing but the skills she's trying to teach you. She's been captured, tortured, left for dead, and still found a way home. She developed every protocol you'll learn in advanced SERE training from personal experience." The students looked at Nakamura with new understanding. "Ma'am," Webb said quietly, "we disrespected you." "Respect is earned," Nakamura replied. "You earned it over the past 3 days." On the helicopter ride back to Fort Bragg, Morrison approached Nakamura. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. We completely underestimated you." Nakamura looked at her. "Morrison, what did you learn in those 3 days? That technology can fail. That teamwork is critical, and that real expertise sometimes comes in unexpected packages. And," Morrison looked at Nakamura's scarred arms, "and I thought I knew everything about survival. But I actually knew nothing." Webb joined the conversation. "Ma'am, we called you crazy, but you saved us." "No," Nakamura said. "You saved yourselves. I just provided the tools." Hayes, overhearing the conversation, joined them. "Phoenix, you didn't tell them the full story, did you?" Nakamura frowned. "Classified information was declassified last month." Hayes turned to the students. "Phoenix isn't just the first SERE graduate. She's the person who developed the program, from her own experiences." "Experiences?" Taylor asked. Hayes continued. "Phoenix spent 47 days surviving behind enemy lines. She was captured, tortured, escaped. Then she came back and transferred all her expertise into the SERE program. Every scar is a lesson. Every technique is lived experience." The students stared at Nakamura in silence. Everything made sense now. The paranoid-seeming protocols, the extreme attention to detail, those survival instincts. "Ma'am," Webb said quietly, "we were disrespectful to you." "Respect is earned," Nakamura repeated. "You earned it over these 3 days." But Hayes wasn't finished. "There's something else you should know. Phoenix didn't just survive behind enemy lines. She completed her mission. She was tasked with gathering intelligence on enemy positions. And even while captured and tortured, she managed to memorize and relay critical information that saved hundreds of Allied lives. Morrison felt her throat tighten. "Ma'am, you never mentioned—" "It's not about the mission," Nakamura said quietly. "It's about coming home and making sure others can come home too." The Phoenix call sign, Hayes explained, wasn't given lightly. In mythology, the phoenix rises from ashes, but the real Phoenix story is about emerging from fire stronger than before. Taylor spoke up. "And you? I've emerged stronger from every challenge," Nakamura said. "And now I transfer that strength to you." A month later, the same students were participating in advanced SERE training, but they were different now. They hung on Nakamura's every instruction. Morrison approached Nakamura after a training session. "Ma'am, may I ask a personal question?" Nakamura nodded. "Your Phoenix call sign, is it really about rising from death?" Nakamura thought for a long moment. The phoenix in mythology is a bird born from fire. But the real Phoenix story is this. It's not about rising from death. It's about emerging from fire stronger than before. And you? I've emerged stronger from every challenge, and now I transfer that strength to you. Webb joined them. "Ma'am, we initially called you crazy. Now we realize the difference between crazy and prepared is very thin," Nakamura said with a smile. "The difference is, preparation works." The students laughed. For the first time, they'd formed a real connection with their instructor. "Ma'am," Taylor said, "next time there's advanced survival training, we'll be ready." Nakamura looked at them. There was pride in her eyes. "You're already ready, because you've learned the most important lesson: respect for the unknown, humility before nature, and trust in your team." Hayes, watching the conversation from a distance, approached Phoenix. "New batch of students coming next month," she said. Same arrogant attitude. "Ready?" Nakamura smiled. That familiar predatory grin. "I'm always ready. The question is, are they ready for the Phoenix experience?" And at that moment the students understood. Phoenix wasn't just a call sign. It was a promise to put them through fire and bring them out stronger. That evening, Phoenix stood looking out at the mountains. The scars on her arms were no longer symbols of weakness, but badges of strength earned through experience. Because real expertise doesn't come from textbooks. It comes from lived experience. Real wisdom doesn't come from comfort zones. It comes from extreme challenges. And sometimes, what the world labels as crazy is actually unmatched preparation. Phoenix knew that the greatest survival skill wasn't physical techniques, it was mental resilience. And the most valuable teaching tool was patience. Patience to let respect be earned rather than demanded. That night, as she prepared lesson plans for a new batch of students, Phoenix smiled. Because every time they said crazy, an instructor became more determined. Every time they said impossible, the challenge became more interesting. And every time they said can't be done, Phoenix prepared to prove that everything is possible if you have enough expertise, enough determination, and enough respect for the unknown. Survival isn't about the strongest. It's about the most prepared. And Phoenix was always prepared. The next morning, she would face 12 new students who thought they knew everything, who would look at her scars and assume weakness, who would question her methods and dismiss her experience. And by the end of their training, they would understand what it meant to be truly prepared. Because that's what Phoenix did. She turned skeptics into believers, arrogance into humility, fear into confidence, one survival lesson at a time. 6 months later, Webb contacted Phoenix from his deployment in Afghanistan. His unit had been cut off from support for 5 days in hostile territory. Using everything Phoenix had taught him, he led his squad to safety. "Thank you for being crazy enough to prepare us for the impossible," his message read. Morrison, now stationed in Alaska, sent photos of the survival shelter she'd built during an emergency landing. The techniques Phoenix had drilled into them had saved her and her crew when their helicopter went down in sub-zero conditions. Taylor wrote from a humanitarian mission in Southeast Asia, where his SERE training had helped him navigate dangerous terrain to deliver medical supplies to isolated villages. Each message reinforced what Phoenix had always known. Preparation isn't paranoia when it saves lives. Colonel Hayes visited Phoenix's office one afternoon, carrying a stack of commendation letters. "Your former students," Hayes said, placing the files on Phoenix's desk. "Every one of them has used their training in real-world situations. 3 successful rescues, 2 emergency survivals, and 1 classified operation that I can't tell you about, but resulted in a Silver Star." Phoenix read through the letters quietly. Each one told the same story. Initial skepticism transformed into gratitude, theory proven in the crucible of reality. "You know what they all say about you now?" Hayes asked. "What's that?" "That you're not crazy, you're prescient. You prepare them for things they hope never to experience. But when they do experience them, they're ready." Phoenix smiled, touching the faded tattoo on her shoulder. "That's the Phoenix legacy. Rising from fire stronger than before. But more importantly, teaching others to do the same." "The new recruits arrive Monday," Hayes said. 12 more know-it-alls who think modern technology has made survival skills obsolete." Phoenix's eyes gleamed with that familiar intensity. "Good. I love a challenge." That weekend, Phoenix returned to the mountains where it all began. She stood at the spot where the avalanche had buried the camp, where her students had first understood the difference between knowledge and wisdom. She thought about the 47 days behind enemy lines that had forged her into Phoenix. The captures, the escapes, the moments when death seemed certain. Each experience had taught her something invaluable, that the human spirit, properly prepared and mentally resilient, could overcome almost anything. Now, every student she trained carried a piece of that knowledge forward. They became their own phoenixes, rising from whatever challenges awaited them. Because that's what true teachers do. They don't just share information, they transform lives. They take raw potential and forge it in the fire of experience until it becomes something unbreakable. Phoenix looked up at the mountain peaks, snow-covered and beautiful in the setting sun. Tomorrow would bring new students, new skeptics, new challenges. And she would be ready. She was always ready. Have you ever been around someone who others called excessive or paranoid? Maybe they weren't paranoid, maybe they were just prepared. Phoenix's story reminds us that real expertise sometimes looks unconventional, and the most valuable lessons often come from the most challenging circumstances. Tell us in the comments, what area of your life do you prepare for at a paranoid level? And how has that preparation given you an advantage? If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to Hidden Heroes Stories, because here we tell the stories of the invisible heroes among us.